I did it again, folks. I forgot to hit unmute when I introduced myself. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of Deadly D8. I am really, really excited to be here. It's been a few weeks since we did our last stream, and just the amazing guest here who I was supposed to have on last week, but my computer decided to crash it and burn itself out and not let OBS work. But thankfully he's here now. This is Matt Cavanaugh, writer of the Botanical Bestiary. You tell us about yourself a little bit.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Matt. I wrote this book. Obsessed with plants enough to do something that crazy. Yeah, not sure what else I have to background bio-wise, but I'm
uh,
fun.
Yeah, I'm just really excited to have you here as you're somebody I've interacted with a lot on Twitter already, and just getting a face to, behind the profile is always a
Yeah.
great feeling. Just right before we go into it, I want to just thank our sponsor, World Anvil. They are really great, and if you want to put your plants into a system that can easily organize everything, World Anvil has your back. Use code dd8 at checkout. You get 40% off a 12-month subscription. Legally binding contract says I have to say all of that. Not But I am just so excited to talk about the Botanical Bestiary. It was a project that when I saw it get announced, I knew it was going to get the entire community riled up about it. And I don't want to say it's because of Cactus Leshy being the popular meme it is in our community, but what kind of got you to go, okay, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna write a few pages of this, and then I'm gonna release it to the public, get a Kickstarter going? What was kind of going through your mind in those initial stages?
Yeah, so I wish I could say that it was a master plan and I knew this was going to be, a $1 million idea out the gate. Really, I was playing at home. It was early pandemic. I didn't have a ton that I
I'm gonna
could do
sit down,
anymore,
I'm gonna write
and
a few
I
pages.
decided to start homebrewing some creatures. Pathfinder's system for homebrewing is great. The rules are easy to follow, so I just tried to do that. And I loved Leshies as soon as I, read the first bestiary and saw the leaf Leshy for no reason. Just thought they were amazing, great creature, great design, loved it. And so I thought I would make a new one. And I really wanted a pepper Leshy. I wanted a Leshy that did fire damage because I thought that was kind of funny. Um, and then the next time I sat down to try and make a creature, I made another Leshy, and then another Leshy, and then another Leshy. And I realized I didn't have a lot of ideas that weren't Leshies. And but I kept putting them onto the various Pathfinder subreddits. That's where I was doing a lot of stuff at that point, was on Reddit, and surprisingly, people loved them. I didn't realize at the time that everyone liked Leshies as much as I was going to, and I just kept making them. And eventually, after I had like 50 Leshies already made, somebody was like, "Hey, you've got enough here for a book." I was like, "Yeah, oh yeah, I really do," and kind of rolled with it from there.
That's really fascinating. Okay, so when you were going at it, is it, with the initial writing, was it like accidental that it was just kept being the same thing of a Leshy over and over and over again, or was this more, I don't want to say subconscious because we just got psychic out, but
Yeah.
I'd love to
Uh,
see that subconscious mind now, the Leshy.
yeah. That's why if you detect thoughts on me, it's just Leshies on a loop. Um, initially it was completely accidental. I really was like, I wanted the pepper Leshy, and then I made like one or two other things. I made like a brain-based creature, and then probably like once a week I was still making a Leshy. And eventually I started limiting myself to only doing once a week because I was putting one out like every day. And that was probably spamming the subreddits and getting annoying. And it eventually got to the point where, because I was only releasing one a week, I just had this backlog of ideas building up. I was like, oh, an aloe Leshy that can soothe the burns from the pepper one. Oh, we need a poisonous Leshy. Why aren't there any poisonous Leshy? And it just kept rolling from there. Pretty much anytime I thought of or saw or ate a plant, I wanted to make it into a Leshy. And that's where
Yeah,
that catalog kind of grew from.
salads must have been really difficult for you to get through.
It's been a difficult year. Yeah, I gained a lot of weight.
Okay, once you got the backlog going and you realize this is a product, when did you start really like going, okay, I'm gonna make this book, I'm gonna get this up and running? Um, what was kind of like I'm sure it's a lot of little moments that were just like building up, but
Mhm.
is there any like kind of like uh not Deus Ex, but some like big event that kind of like this is like, okay, I want this. Like for me, it probably would have been Cactus Leshy getting released. Like the artwork alone, I'll never
Yeah.
shut up about it. It's perfect.
So I think I think it was a combination. I think there were a lot of little moments to lead to the start of the project, and then the one big moment where I knew the project was a good idea. So the little moments leading up to it was, I just always kind of wanted to do a Kickstarter. I thought the idea would just be fun and it would be something to yeah, I didn't know that it would be successful. I thought it'd be just something to try and to practice and, at least throw my hand at it. Um, and so I just kind of went for it in that sense. Where the kind of like aha moment for the project was the first time I saw Sita's art. When she posted her character Leshy that she played with at home on Reddit, I saw that and I was like, that is the perfect art for a Leshy. That is exactly what I want my Lushies to look like. And at that point, I didn't have any art for any of these creatures. They're all just living in my head and on stat blocks. And when I reached out to Sita and asked if she would, want to be involved in this project, making it kind of clear at the time that like I was a nobody in the community. I was just that dude who makes Lushies. I had no publication credits. I had like 40 followers on Twitter. Um, I just thought that this would be a cool idea and I liked her art and I thought she does Lushies, I do Lushies. This is, meant to be. And she apparently agreed with that. And that was really when she signed on to it. That's when I was like, all right, this project will get funded. People will like this because and if the at that point my goal more than anything was to get 50 illustrations of Sita's art for my creation. That's all I really wanted to see was enough money to fund getting all this art. And it worked out.
What do you think was like the real kickoff? Like, what was like the post? What was the thing that really made you go, this is gonna be a successful product? Because I think it overall ended up being a really successful project. I mean, you were fully funded. You met a few of your goals. I
Yeah.
have the PDF open right now, so clearly it was finished at some point.
Yeah, no, I mean, we again, I think it was always tiers of expectation. So the first Leshy going out onto a subreddit and people liking it, um, that was sort of a cool moment of like, oh, I can actually do this. And then when it was consistently successful, when almost every Leshy, not all of them, but the vast majority were very highly rated with only positive comments or a couple of critiques, continuously, I was like, oh, this is, going really well. And then again, lots of little things started adding up. So I did the RPG Superstar design contest when that launched, and had two creatures placed. One of them placed platinum, and that was maybe it's a level of imposter syndrome, but I was kind of constantly going like, I'm nobody in this field. Why, you know, who's actually going to want all these? And I was like, oh, if I'm placing platinum out of all these amazing designs, maybe I actually know what I'm doing, and this is actually going okay. And as far as the project being successful, I was like, yeah, we'll get funded, but will we hit a stretch goal? I don't know. And the day I launched it was like right after I launched is when Linda Zayas Palmer signed on to do the heritages as a stretch goal. And that was sort of a shocking moment for me of like this person who's massive in the field of Lushies, and Pathfinder in general, that she wants to be involved in this project. Her name added a lot of weight to it. Mark Seifter had talked to me about it a little bit and was pretty supportive of the project. And all of that kind of background support too of like these people who I look up to and respect in the field being okay with putting their name to the project was sort of a okay, this is actually going to go pretty well. Um, and yeah, and again, anytime we hit a stretch goal, I was shocked by it. And by the end of it, we had hit all of them. Or I think we hit all but one, and then I just filled it anyway because I was just so excited that we had gotten that far. Yeah.
In chat, Brant said the great thing with Lushies is that there's no one look or design to them. They run the gamut in official Paizo content, so the design space is completely wide open. Uh, I think that's pretty true of Leshies. I mean, I obviously I have the background. I could just see your background right now, and very cartoonish style of each one being so unique.
hmm
Um, I'm kind of jumping the timeline a little bit because you and I started talking about this a little bit beforehand, and then we had to go live, so we could obviously go more into it. But one of the things you mentioned was that one of the tiers was that people could submit their own, idea for a Leshy, try to get into the book. Um, you mentioned like some concepts were just too either broad or they didn't feel like Leshies. I feel like that comment really goes well with what we were talking about there. I'd really like to start up a conversation again about what for you said, okay, that's a Leshy, and that's just a creature that just happens to be associated with plants. What was the balancing act there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so even before the book, when I was still writing stuff to Reddit, people I got a couple of comments asking about stuff related to the Green Men and like making a Leshy god. And I was like, well, Leshy's not a god. That's well, in real world mythology, Leshy is a god. But in Pathfinder, Leshy's not a god. And that was sort of a thing too of like trying to define what is a Leshy. And so, a lot of people were asking early on for like a redwood Leshy, which we ended up making. It's in the background there. Can't see my finger, but um and I had initially resisted the idea of a Leshy that is, 60 feet tall and massive tank that can like stomp on you. Um, because to me, what the Leshy was leaning into this idea of a small thing that's crafted by somebody. So it has to be simple enough that a person could craft it and use it as a familiar. It needed to be plant based. It needed to be a singular plant. And it needed to be something that had this sort of nature spirit embodying into it. And that was sort of the main part lore wise that I wanted to reach. For mechanics, it always needed to have changed shape for whatever plant it was. It always needed to have a verdant burst ability where when it dies, it explodes in some way. And it needed, some similar scores in that sense. So like a Leshy in a certain environment always has a higher stealth score than if it's out of its environment, stuff like that. But I realize that really beyond that, you can do a lot. I mean, we've got this, the little rose leshies are very humanoid looking compared to the corpse flower leshy right next to it that is like a dinosaur, basically. And there's a lot of range, like you said, even in the Paizo art, that you can make these kind of look like animals. They can kind of look like humanoids. They can, kind of be anywhere in between. And I think especially for ones that are being used for creatures to fight against, there's no reason that if you're crafting a thing out of a plant for a spirit to come into, that it has to be a humanoid and walk on two legs and have two hands to hold a weapon. It's perfectly reasonable for it to be, an amorphous blob or whatever weird shape or, this butterfly mint leshy floating over my head. Um,
Yeah,
there's nothing
like
wrong with playing around with those designs. Yeah.
yeah, like currently, I know because you get to see the stream, but we have the Reed Leshi next to the Rice Leshi,
Mhm.
just because I looked up the redwood and clearly we're just gonna stay in the R's for a little bit.
That's fine.
Like the Reed is not something I would call humanoid. Like that is
Yeah.
at best a frog. If I
Mhm.
had to really describe something to it, um, did you when working on I know you didn't write the heritage side of it,
Mhm.
um, was having that like process, like the mind process of going, I want players to be able to play non-humanoid creatures because we've gotten a few of those with like Konrasu, which is like a tree leshy but with a giant orb in the center of it.
Filled
I
with
don't know.
stars, yeah.
It's they're one of the weirder ones. Cool, but weird. uh, what made you actively think about the players, or were you thinking purely for the GM? Because most of this book is the stat blocks, which is great. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
that's what it was out to do. It wouldn't be much of a bestiary if it was all heritages. Um, did you ever see the balance being like played out of this is something I really want for players, and this is something I really want for GMs, and this is something I want for both?
Um, I can't honestly say that I put that much thought into that level of balance. A lot of, almost every Leshy was written before I decided to do the Kickstarter. And so they were written purely as a stat block. They didn't have art with them. So I kind of pictured all of them similar to the Leshies that were published at that point, which was like the leaf Leshy, the fungus, the gourd, which were all plants, but generally humanoid shaped. The fungus maybe the least so. Um, but none of the Leshies have a humanoid trait, right? I mean, they're all still plants and Leshies at the end of the day. And so there's a lot of room for variation and a lot of, a decent amount of the design that some of the plants ended up with is just Sita's art. I gave her kind of free reign on the designs. I certainly didn't picture the mint as a butterfly, for example. And then that was just the direction she wanted to go with it in, and we went with it. There are some that I kind of played with the design more, like the dragon blood tree was always going to be dragon-esque in shape, and there were some that I just knew Sita was going to make them a certain shape. I knew I wanted the reed to be kind of frog-looking and to have like a flute that it could play to be sort of bard-like, like a reed flute. But when I initially designed it, I was thinking of just a humanoid-looking thing made out of reeds holding a pan flute. Um, as far as balancing for players went, it wasn't really until I think it was the Rose Leshy was the first one I published where people wanted to play as it. I hadn't heard any feedback at that point of like, can you make this into a heritage? And I tried about a year, 2 years ago to do that. And they were all right. They're still out there if you wanted to hunt them down. The free heritages that I put on Reddit. Lindas are better. So,
Okay, sorry. I was while you were talking about that, we had a random bot come into a chat, and it looks like we found you a girl, but I'd rather have plants right now.
yeah, no, agreed.
Okay. One of the main things that really drew my personal appeal to the project was the sheer scope of it. How much, and I don't know if you want to say if there's going to be ever a part two. I'm sure a lot of things are still kind of in the air as you're and ending the full process of making sure all the orbs are completed. Um, was there stuff that was explicitly cut out that you're just like, this doesn't fit well within the theme right now, but we want to see later? Or
Mhm.
was there just so much content that you just had to let certain stuff go? How much did end up on the cutting block? Because as someone who publishes a lot of stuff, there are moments where I'm like, okay, I gotta cut this back, or else this is just too much.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the exact number of Leshies that ended up not in the book. Um, but there were a lot. Even as we were going through the book, I wrote my initial 50 and they were all pre-written, before the Kickstarter even started. And had run them by Sita, and then we added in the 10 design tier ones, and then the 5 additional epic level ones. So those ones had to be written after the fact. And as we were getting through the art, Sita was churning out like one of these a week for basically a year. And I was playing around with layout and updating things. That's when I started kind of planning out more of what the book should look like and realized, I'd really like to see more fungus leshies in here. We don't have enough of those yet, so I'd cut one thing and add in a new fungus type. Like the dead man's finger leshy got added in pretty late into the process because I just wanted to have more fungus. Um, that may be entirely because I started reading a book on fungus and I thought they were cool and decided we should add that in. So there's probably 10 to 15 full stat blocks that didn't make it in, and then probably another 20 ideas that didn't make it in, roughly guessing. And even that is, at a certain point, I kind of made myself stop coming up with ideas because I needed to focus on the ones I was actually making instead of just like, oh, you know what else would be cool. So
Yeah. Gianni in chat, if you don't know who he is, he's from the channel Hijinks, friend of the channel.
yes,
It
they
says
did the first at Gen Con last year. They ran a very nice one shot using some of the Lushies before the book was done, and you should check
nice.
it out. It's great.
Always check out Hijinks. I just think that's just a good rule in general. He says, Matt, what Leshy is your favorite for marrying the mechanics of the game with the plant in real life?
Oh, that is a good question. I'm glad that the question wasn't what's your favorite Leshy because that is such a challenging one for me.
All right, if you were gonna
Um,
marry any Leshy, which one would it be?
I really like the Colorado Space Swarm. That one, the design tier backer helped a lot with that design. But the table at the bottom for the swarm attack where it's got kind of random effects based on a roll, I thought was great. And I think that that really sums up well the like alien nature of the creature with the actual mechanics because and even I think one of the things it can do is it casts enlarge on the target, which gives you like a buff, but then afterwards you're weakened. It just plays really well with the lore of the creature, the actual mechanics, and how it fits into the game. I think it makes for a really fun encounter. Is going to be my answer for now until I randomly think of another one that I really like. But I could honestly probably say that about almost every Leshy. I think each of them has something really unique plant wise that ties in well to that particular plant in the real world and or a related lore. I tried to, if a plant is particularly important for a certain culture or a myth, I try to lean into that as much as possible. Um, and try to then tie that into the mechanics. The pomegranate is another good one where it is dead during the winter months. It becomes an undead Leshy. And obviously it's leaning into Persephone mythology, doesn't maybe make a huge impact on the actual gameplay, but it uses the mechanics to enhance the lore and the flavor and make the encounter even more memorable.
That's really interesting because I think what's really unique about second edition and specifically the monster stat blocks of second edition is the ability to tie in said lore to the like stat block itself. Let's just like look at the pomegranate, which we kind of have up on screen already.
Mhm.
You mentioned that it was going off of the lore of Persephone from Greek mythology. When I can go into the whole preamble about how she was kidnapped into Tartarus and all that fun stuff, but how did you manage to like balance the fantasy of it all with the real life lore application? Because we just talked about like the mechanics itself, and obviously mechanics can be really tied to it, but how would how did you balance like the fantasy that we have of Leshies in game with Pathfinder lore with the real life lore of stuff like the Gimpy Gimpy plant or so on and so forth?
Mhm. I think Leshies are compared to most creatures, even in Pathfinder, they just have an extra level of versatility because they can literally be any plant, and at the end of the day, they are a primal nature spirit. So you know the powers of that spirit can vary from creature to creature. They can have motives that are unusual, almost fey-like and kind of being hard to understand. And so there's a lot of room to work with a Leshy where um, it still feels like a natural thing. Like of, saying that this Leshy can become undead and is spirit-like and guides other spirits. Well, if it is a nature spirit, that makes perfect sense that during the winter months, all the plants around it are decaying and dying, and it helps guide spirits away from a frozen forest back to the nature plane or back into some sort of primal essence, and then in the spring maybe helps them return. And that there's a lot of room to kind of play with that, um, as far as making it into an actual mechanic. um, there was a lot of I had so many options. There were so many things I had to decide how I wanted the pomegranate to work. It could have been a much higher level that just does death effects kind of instantaneously. There's a lot of different ways to lean into that sort of death motif for that one. And I think that was true of most of the plants. Is there was something, either flavoring their attacks, the arrow attack for the pomegranate or the grenade attack based on its name, those things tie in the plant itself pretty well, but then tying in the lore, it's kind of like you said, Pathfinder just makes it really easy mechanically to fit in things that probably shouldn't fit. I feel like in most other systems, if a creature suddenly became undead in the middle of a fight, it'd have a pretty big impact. It has an impact here, but it isn't one that's going to break the entire system. And so you can kind of get away with playing around with those options more.
You mentioned that like you could have made the Leshy, the pomegranate Leshy higher, or made it do a bunch of death effects. We were talking prior to the stream of you felt like high level Leshies was something not really either seen or you didn't really want to see. What kind of made you change your mind a little bit, and if it did change by a lot, besides the financial backing of it all, but more in the
Yeah.
literal sense of what in your mind differentiates a high level versus a low level Leshy?
Yeah, and you can kind of see the spread of levels in the book. There's one level 10, one level 12. We jump up to the high teens and 20s, and everything else is below level 9. So I definitely still prefer Leshy to be a fairly low. To me, it was more about the plant they were based on. And so that's where I try to, design wise, I try to go with the idea of a really, really powerful something made this really powerful servant, basically. And the idea that not every Leshy was a familiar, but they all, that's a big mechanic of them in Pathfinders, Leshies being familiars for players. And so, if a god decided to make a Leshy, it wasn't going to make a leaf Leshy. It was going to make something far greater. Or if you had a level 20 druid making a Leshy as a familiar, it was going to make something far greater. And so I try to lean into that a little bit for those higher level ones. As far as why I thought higher level was acceptable at that point, um, I think I kind of just came around to the idea of a stronger spirit could be enticed into this, borderline mortal body for a reason. And that reason doesn't have to be defined. The ways of the Leshy are mysterious and varied. And that was sort of the thing that got me around to it. Was people kept asking for high level ones, and I kind of eventually was won over to the idea of it does make sense lore wise that there'd be a few very powerful, still no Leshy gods, still no dragons that are plants, because that already exists. So there's
Yeah, thanks,
still
Bestiary too.
yeah. So
Paizo did it again. They wrote it already.
they always do. It's yeah. I really I loved the free RPG day Leshy adventure that just came out.
Yes.
Um, I of course opened it up and was like, ah, the cover right there is the dandelion Leshy. Just made that. Like, my book's coming out soon. Come on. But yeah, no, they
Hire me, Paizo.
prolific.
Hire me.
Yeah.
One of the questions I really like asking people, because I think it really shows not only an insight to the person, but insight onto the writing aspect, is was there any sort of media that you consumed that kind of helped push ideas along? Obviously, you're going to be doing a lot of like reading of like different kinds of plants and stuff, but like when I think of Leshies, and I like if I think of media, I'm going Plants vs Zombies, just because that was a game I grew up playing with a lot of, and to be honest, I really want a Plants vs Zombie Pathfinder book. But what was kind of like some of the media that you were consuming that helped write the book in a sense?
That's a great question. Yeah, there were definitely a few different things. I realized during the course of writing the book that I was maybe unconsciously doing some of this, where every game that I played, every video game where you had the option to be a plant, I was a plant. And that was never an intentional choice. It just, I play Guild Wars 2. I play in the Sylvari race, which are all plants. I've been playing League of Legends. I've been playing Ivern, and he's the only plant in the game, one of the only plants in the game. I just kept finding myself playing as plants for things and kind of seeing the different ways that people interpreted plant creatures. Most of those are humanoids, and so it's a little bit different than some of the Lushies that were made, but um, they all had different takes on growing thorns or having regenerative magic or things like that kind of we're all nature based but have very different impacts. Watching a lot of Harley Quinn with Poison Ivy
Yeah.
front and center.
I'm very
Great
aware
show.
of that.
And then I was also in the middle of writing. I got a copy of The Entangled Life, which is basically just a biologist talking about how great mushrooms and fungus are. And that led to the addition of a couple of fungi into the book. So
What I'm hearing is that, ladies and gentlemen, non-binary folks, we have got confirmed part 2 of the Botanical Bestiary, Dark Fungus. Check it out. It
oops, all
drops at Gen
mushrooms.
Con it 3 week next week. Oh my god,
Oh
it is
God, I
next week.
wish.
Crap.
Yeah, first year not going in a while, and I'm very, very sad about it.
It's back. How did the bot come back? I banned it. it knew the Leshies. It was too good. And
Mm.
it needed to come check it out again. Okay, so that's really interesting about the media consumption side of it. Was there any point where you had a direct one-to-one of this is like a character I see a lot. I really want it represented in this way. And so like it's like, I made a beholder, but it's called an eye gazer. You know?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, there are some creatures in the book that are definitely heavily referenced or pulled from existing Paizo creatures. It's a great way to make sure you stay balanced, by the way. So the dragon fruit Leshy is a Hydra, or based on the Hydra. Um, One of the Lushies is based on, I think the Reed Leshi is based on the Spring-Heeled Jack for its leap ability. And the Dragon Blood and the Seabell Leshy are definitely dragon-esque in their design. But I didn't go, there's never a time of like, I really want a dragon or I really want, a beholder. And this is gonna be that version of it. It was always more about the plant than any pre-existing creature or character.
One of the interesting things I found when flipping through the book was the connection to real life, plants, because obviously that's what the book was based on. But was there ever a point where you're like, I really wish I had more fantastical side of what a plant could be? Like, can I have a plant that sets themselves on fire, runs into the battlefield, and gives hugs to everyone? Make them take persistent fire damage, something like in that realm of
No, keep talking. I'm just going to take notes on that really quick.
Oh, cool. So you haven't heard of Plants vs Zombies yet.
Yeah. So yes and no. I have made a couple of Leshies that are. I went out of my way to make a plant, like design a fantastical plant, make a stat block for it, so I could then make a Leshy for that plant. None of those ended up in this book. Everything in the book is a natural plant, other than the color out of space. Um,
No, that's
the
natural. Lovecraft was right on that one.
I've seen it. Yeah, no, the next book will I want to lean more into that, playing around with biology. The problem I have with that is I am too strict with myself, and anything that is made like that, it needs to make sense evolutionarily why it would happen. Which is not a great way to make a fantastical creature, but so
My
that's
friend,
that's where I'm gonna go for next. Yeah.
magic. Just say a wizard did it, and then it solves. It's worked for me every time something ridiculous has happened. It's just like, yeah, some
Yep.
wizard just messed around, and then this now exists.
I've gone through with my fiance who gets bored to death listening to me talk about all this. And we'll just kind of go through like, yeah, so what if this plant it evolved this ability because it has this particular type of resin that stores a certain material and it grows in this really mineral rich deposit? And she's like, it's magic. Just let it be magic. Why do you have to explain it?
Yeah, I'm not the only one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Had okay, so one of the things that I really liked was stuff like the Dead Man's Fingers, which was
Mhm.
some of the artwork the artwork I've always like really loved. It really reminds me more of a cartoon theme, you know. Something that I've been really trying to, scream about on Twitter, I don't to much avail, I guess, is just that Pathfinder has hit a point where I think, and I really would like your opinion on it, is we've hit it where it's a cartoon essentially because there's so many options that it feels like an illustration come to life.
Mhm.
Obviously, this has taken a little bit more of a cartoonish approach. I think even Paizo took a cartoonish approach with their Leshies. What is your thoughts on that? As this was like the central like look was that cartoony. Like I could picture this being a cartoon on a Cartoon Network or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. My mom keeps asking if we can make this into a children's book somehow.
I think that
Um,
would be cool. Hey,
yeah.
Paizo, let's go. Leshy
Yeah, no,
teach you ABC.
it's a great way to learn about the environment and conservation. And
I think that would be really cool. I'm not gonna lie.
I'm gonna have to make some more notes. Yeah, no, I think I think the thing with any role playing game is it can always be as serious as you want to make it, and at that point, if you're trying to have a gritty game, the fact that the art is a little ridiculous isn't going to throw you off. And if you want to have a ridiculous game, then the ridiculous art fits in. There's already so much gritty art out there for most things. Um, people had actually very early on. I had at least one person express like a disdain for the art, and immediately blocked them and all of that. But
Oh yeah,
they
yeah.
they were basically like, why isn't this more realistic? It doesn't fit with the Paizo aesthetic. And I was like, well, because they're fun plants
Oh,
that are
I'm
just whimsical and crazy. Let them be crazy. Like I don't see the problem.
whoa. Hold up.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm playing Outlaws of Alkenstar right now, and there's a literal cactus Leshy that can shoot thorns out of itself that has a monocle on. How is that not a cartoon?
Yeah, so I really like there's lots of memes that always go around of like the wizard summoning like a comet spell, and you roll a basic reflex save and take half damage from getting hit by a comet. Like how it doesn't have to make sense, and the DM or GM could sit there and go through, oh well, you found a small rock that you hid behind and it absorbed some of the damage. No, just you Bugs Bunnied it. You got hit by a comet and you stand up in accordion for a minute. Like, just have fun with it. I don't know.
I love that. I I yes, this is exactly something that I've been really trying to like you captured the essence of what I've been really just trying to press on about is I think if you want gritty real Pathfinder, you're going to have to cut out so much of I think what makes Pathfinder really great. I mean,
Yeah.
for those who haven't read through Dark Archive yet, I know that was just released like 2 days ago on Archives, but like there are some cartoony abilities. Like I think it was the Time Mage that could summon an alternate version of themselves using a summon spell. Did you have that in mind as you were writing it? You're just like the Bugs Bunny of it, more cartoony instead of like the traditional Lord of the Rings esque. Uh, I don't. I can flip into every adjective to describe Euro fantasy kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much, again, I feel like so much stuff happened kind of unconsciously. And now that I look back on, like, oh, yeah, I did do that, didn't I? Um, there's just I just try not to take myself too seriously while I was writing. Half the intros to a Leshy have puns or jokes in it. I mean, the pomegranate Leshy has a grenade attack. Like some of
As
it
it
was
should.
just for fun. Yeah. I mean, the tumbleweed Leshy, again, this has been in development for forever. So that was before the art for that was done before Guns and Gears came out. Sita just drew it with a gun and made it a little cowboy, and it was amazing. And then one day she has sent me the exact same one, but with a mustache drawn on it. And so I think as April Fool's Day, I sent that one around to everybody. It was just like, this is what the Tumbleweed looks like. He just has this little, really over the top bad guy mustache. Um, I don't know why you wouldn't have fun in a role playing game. It's all in your mind. It's all made up. Just have a good time.
Definitely. What made you choose Pathfinder for all of this? Because this could have easily been a maybe not D&D 5e, which I know you did, but I'm just trying to think of like a Powered by the Apocalypse game. Something that's a little bit more narrative heavy. I
Mhm.
I mean, I could list a dozen TRPGs to give examples of. What made you go, okay, that's Pathfinder? What makes you say this is distinctly Pathfinder?
So what it really was for me was that I just started playing Pathfinder when the playtest came out. I'd never played really any role playing game prior to that. Um, I was at Gen Con when the playtest released for 2E,
Oh,
and
same.
oh yeah, we probably walked
See,
right
this is
by
how
each
much
other.
we're on a psychic connection. Like we were there 3 years ago.
Yep. Well, so that was my first Gen Con. I bought the playtest. That was the first role playing game book I ever bought. I had played a single game of D&D. I don't know what edition when I was like 16, and that was it. Um, and I just really liked Pathfinder everything. I mean, I liked how the mechanics worked. I liked the rules for designing things. I liked how it played. I immediately started running games at home. I tried doing that with the playtest. That was a little rough. Getting the final actual rule book made it a little bit easier with my group of friends at home who had also never played anything. Um, and that was, where all of it came from is I wanted to create creatures for this game I was running. And so that's what I did and so it wasn't in Pathfinder by any sort of designer choice, just that I was playing Pathfinder. I wanted creatures for it and I started making them. And I do think that's one thing that I like about this book is as much as like you know, I wrote every creature in it, but constantly with feedback from the community because I was posting it just as, hey, I want to make this thing for my home game. Did I do it right? Basically was how it started. And I think that in some ways it was really community driven effort. I mean, it definitely wouldn't have happened if uh, the various subreddits weren't so supportive of it. If I hadn't had people telling me that they liked the creature and they wanted to see another one, I would have stopped after 10 Leshies and not made 65 of them. Um, and that I think is a testament to the Pathfinder community and also a testament to the book that it really was made not to be a product, but to be something that you would actually want to use in a home game and for that purpose. And I think that shines through with it a little bit. Is the only amount of tooting my own horn that I'm willing to do.
Gianni asks, which Leshy would make the best BBEG?
Oh man, I really love the idea of the final boss at the end of all of it being three Leshies in a trench coat that have been like pretending to
Yes.
be a lich the whole time or something. Um, You'd obviously have to play with the levels a little bit, but narratively, I think that is the perfect final boss. Color Out of Space also makes a good one, and then any of the epic tiers make for great ones. But I think the three in a trench coat is really the way to go.
I'm looking at the watermelon. I'm kind of thinking the watermelon Leshy should be it.
The watermelon is just it's one of those ones too where like you look at the art, I don't even want to fight it. I just want to play with it. I want to like throw a stick and have it bring it back. Like it's just adorable.
I like the idea that it's so like if I like the idea that almost every supplement is canon to like Pathfinder, and I just want to picture some poor Pathfinder Society member who's just like, I really want to hug this Leshy, and it just like clamps into them.
Mhm.
Just ends up being like a watermelon. Oh,
That's definitely one for the one of the people on my Discord the other day play tested the Gimpy Gimpy Leshy and had sort of that effect of like the art is kind of cute. The reality is less so.
oh yeah, I tell people about the Gimpy Gimpy, and like that was one of the things I was really glad when scrolling through was the Gimpy Gimpy, just because it's one of my favorite plants of all time because it's really
Mhm.
fascinating. For those who don't know, it's painful if you touch it, and you can get PTSD from actually getting touched by it. It's hurtful, but that thing does look cute. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
It Craig asks, "What is your favorite plants?" That's a That's a statement. All right. What was your favorite like plant to study for this? I'm gonna reword the question a little bit. I'm sorry, Craig.
Favorite one to study, I really liked the Manchineal that made one of the epic levels. I wasn't super familiar with that one prior to making the Leshy. I was kind of just trying to look up plants that were extremely dangerous and interesting and came across that one. Um, that one was fun because there's a lot of stories about it because it's unlike some of the other really dangerous plants. You know, the a lot of dangerous plants people avoid or they're really rare. The Manchineal is, as far as I can understand, fairly common in the areas that it grows, and a lot of tourists don't understand what it is. And there's a lot of stories you can find online of people eating their apples or collecting their leaves because they think it's a cool looking plant, and then only later realizing that they are now heavily poisoned and have blisters forming everywhere. And they're mildly horrific stories. I haven't read any of anybody
Yeah.
dying, but
That sounds like a Tuesday. It's fine.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, no, that one was really fun to read about, and just it has cool aspects of like if you stand under it when it's raining, the rain will absorb some of the toxin, and when it drips on your skin, it'll leave blisters. I mean, just something that I had never heard of a plant doing before, and I thought that was really cool. And then the other ones were ones where they had cool lore or like cool aspects I didn't know about, even if it's a common plant. You know, the coconut plant. I had never heard the story of Sina and the eel and the sort of the creation myth of coconuts. Um, and I thought, learning about that from like the cultural aspect was really fun as well.
When you were going to write stuff like the more deadly plants in the world, Gimpy Gimpy and the Bacchanal, so on and so forth, what had the internal designer going off? I know a lot of this is subconscious because as somebody who has to write, understand a lot of that, but you have to balance a mechanical and then the actual aspect of a real life deadly plant. What made you kind of play with that balance a little bit? Because obviously the levels between Gimpy Gimpy and the Mackinac are dramatically different. I think like one's level 6 and the other one's level 19.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of it usually started with the idea of kind of just breaking out. I just kind of read through as much information as I could find about that particular plant and finding what really made it unique. So, was it poisonous? Was it um, known for growing after forest fires? Was there something about it that was really special among the plant world? And then trying to list out, of those 10 things that might be unique about this plant, what two or three of those would make for a good mechanic? And then it sort of depended on the level. If it's a lower level creature, you maybe only have room for one or two things that are going to be interesting without it now suddenly having 10 abilities for a level 2 creature. It doesn't really work. And if it was a much higher level creature, then you've got more room to play around with, um, you know, giving it more flavor and more of a threat and playing around with more different aspects of it. So definitely, for the Gimpy Gimpy, it was immediately like, all right, it has these needles on it that are filled with toxin. So it needs to be toxic. It needs to be able to have that poison last for a long time because that's really lots of plants are toxic, but this thing's poison can stay in you for a year. That's something special. And so then trying to figure out like, all right, what can make an effect last for a year? Well, a disease course or a poison course can have, day, week, month iterations. And so that immediately made the trichome poison level. Um, there's really and it was kind of immediately there's really no other way to do that. Whereas for a different creature, it might just be it does poison damage. If it's much lower level and doesn't have anything unique to its poison other than being poisonous.
Was there ever an aspect of the design process where you just felt so confident in the writing that you're like, okay, this is what I want to show off. Because a lot of these are really unique plants that, have various unique features. Because obviously, the world before it all burns due to climate change has some really interesting plants in them. What was like a mechanic that you were really like, I want to show this off. This says I know a lot of authors don't really like show boasting a little bit, but I'm
Mhm.
gonna kind of make you do it a little bit. What was like that thing you're like, I want to show this off. This is something I'm really, really proud of writing.
Ah, man, mechanically speaking, that's a good question. Um,
I mean, you could do both parts of that question of being what was a plant that you're really, really overall proud of writing for, and then you can go to a mechanic one as well.
yeah, I'm just scrolling as I'm stalling for time. So one that I'm really happy with how it came out in the end, and I like the mechanics for it, is the cannabis Leshy. I don't know that
Ooh,
anybody has had any issues with the cannabis Leshy. Um, he's just
America,
this
no.
happy, just a happy little frog that just wants to hang out. But the mechanic aspect of him that I really like is the harsh vibes, just chill ability, where it has a different effect of either calm emotions, um, or paranoia on a given player. And so I really like the idea of like one creature having this sort of varied effect on somebody, essentially at random. But that it still had an impact on the gameplay no matter what, but it added to the flavor of the creature while being kind of funny. I mean, just realistically, it's a borderline joke ability, but it still gives the creature impact on the game. It would have been just as easy to just say, if you walk within its cloud, you get common emotions on you, and then everybody acts like they're Shaggy from Scooby Doo while they're fighting it, and then that's the encounter, and that would have been great. But adding in that you could also end up really paranoid, and the idea of like most of the party being kind of calm and chill while they're fighting this creature, and then one guy is just losing his mind in the corner. That to me is that was great design. If I'm patting myself on the back,
I
I'm
think
really
that's
happy
pretty
with that
good design. I'm not gonna lie. I I this is something I've really found interesting about plants, and this is what really also kind of drew me to the project because when this project was announced, I was doing environmental science, and
one.
lo and behold, I was studying plants in that time. How did you? Was there ever a time when you were writing it where you were balancing the environment of it all, with the actual stat block itself? Because there are like, for example, for those who don't know, there are like slugs that manifest after forest fires, and that's what kind of helps like rebuild the forest up a little bit. They thrive in that extreme heat environment. Is there any cases of that in the botanical bestiary? Is there something that you particularly want to show off about? A balance between like swamp marshes and whatever swamp based plant.
Yeah. So one comment that I got a lot from people when I was first putting the book together. So it was, Kickstarter's funded. I'm now starting to arrange things. Um, and again, because I'd never played Pathfinder 1E, I wasn't aware of this, but apparently in 1E, the best series used to label the environments that you'd be likely to find a creature in. And people really wanted that for this one. So the individual stat blocks aren't labeled that way, but the appendix has every Leshy sorted into one of, I don't know, 8 or so environments that you might find them. So in a desert, wetlands, on a mountaintop, in a jungle, things like that. And that was again where one Leshy might get cut was if I felt like I had way too many Leshies in the Alpine region. I needed more in the garden district, basically. So I played around with balancing out. I mean, I think we ended up, as I'm looking at, there's still a lot of like farm because lots of cool plants were farm plants. But all of the different groups have at least 3 or 4 leshies in them. All the different environments. I mean, so I try to balance out having different environmental options for that. I do have plants that are known to thrive after forest fires. The pyro orchid is there's a couple, and that's one of the few where it's not the exact name of the actual plant because there's lots of plants that
Mhm.
thrive after a forest fire. That was sort of it was modeled after a particular orchid in Australia, but I wanted it to just kind of generally represent, you know, these pyrophyte plants that enjoy fires and do well after them, and kind of envisioned, the Leshy being this creature that would either survive the fire and then help the plants grow afterwards, or maybe even start the fire to kind of trigger the plants to be able to grow in that environment. So, yeah, I try to lean into that a little bit. It would again usually be if the plant had a particular environment that it would thrive in, I would then include that in the stat block and then maybe pick out plants to fill in for a particular environment. But every once in a while, the environment is an important part of how the plant actually functions in the game too.
Guy says, Australia bush plants are metal as fuck, and I
Yeah,
look.
it should be of no surprise to anybody the number of times that I went, all right, what's a really dangerous plant I could put in? Oh, Australia. Okay, cool. You guys got it covered. Glad to hear it.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, everything down there is already pretty deadly. If I needed to make a deadly bestiary, I could just look at that country. Oh my god, will this bot go away? I keep I keep hiding it and it keeps coming back. The Leshy power, it's too strong.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh what I had a question in my mind. I was starting, I promise. Okay, I got it back. How do you
Mhm.
integrate some of these creatures into, let's say, Galarian, or a little bit more of if I'm playing a Tolkien-esque game, but I really want to use these stat blocks? How do I make them feel like they're natural in the world?
Well, I think that's one of the benefits of almost all of the plants that these are based on being real world plants, because it makes it a little bit easier to understand where they would be coming from. Just kind of naturally know where you might find a rose leshy. If I just say rose leshy, you're immediately picturing a garden or maybe a shrub along the side of a road. You're not expecting to find it in the middle of a desert or on the mountaintop. So you kind of know immediately where it should fall in that way. So not every plant is that like that. I don't know immediately what kind of environment a magnolia tree thrives in, but that's what you know that little appendix kind of helps with a little bit. But I think anywhere that you could picture there being a particular type of plant, you could picture the Leshy that goes with it. I mean, the tumbleweed doesn't matter if you're in Galarian or in Middle Earth, it's going to be in a dry, arid region that's maybe windblown. You're going to see some tumbleweeds going by. Just because it's not spaghetti western doesn't mean
Mhm.
that you can't have that plant there. So I think most of them fit in fairly naturally. Color out of space, probably the least so. And there's a
No,
few
that
others
fits in
that might be
everywhere. I don't know why.
it actually, I think technically does. I think it's the one that's the most versatile environment wise, theoretically. But yeah, I mean, and the humanoid ones I think easily populate any sort of settlement. I definitely want to go to a coffee shop run by a coffee leshy. Um, and that's how my home games have gone, honestly, is I have little leshy enclaves or leshies working in certain settings that relate to whatever their plant is. And that's gone pretty well so far, I think.
Okay, that's really fascinating. Have you then, and this is kind of getting into a little bit more of a narrative
Mhm.
side of it all. I like I said, I don't know if you're writing adventures. There's not a lot of stuff I I was told ahead of time, just like, hey, hype up this product that does not exist yet. Um, was there ever times where you had to think about the in-world applications of it being a fantasy game, where there's just you were talking about, like, coffee leshy running a coffee shop. Is there other, like, examples of like a, a setting in a TTRPG that would really thrive with having these creatures in them? I think, like, think about like Numeria's like dry, barren desert. Like Tumbleleshi would probably fit really well in there. But it being Numeria, it probably also will have a few alien leshies in there.
Yeah, It's a good question, and I'm trying to think of a good answer to match how good of a question that is. Uh, I think that narratively, the Leshies are again really versatile. There's a lot of different ways you could go about using them. For my home game, I play fully in a like a homebrewed world, and the Leshy, I've there's been so many things where there's a powerful druid in the woods who has a bunch of Leshies, and so the players get to see, even if they're not in combat with them, they see all these different varieties of Leshies that are part of that world. The players then overthrew the druid and helped the Leshies to unionize, which that was fun.
Yeah, solidarity
Um,
in that.
um, we've had I made little towns and settlements where Lushies who were familiars who do outlive the druids or escaped or decided they want to go on adventures or whatever have then made their own little settlements and made these little enclaves of just all Lushies living together. Um, and we I was talking to somebody recently, the idea of like when a Leshy when the Leshies all have that verdant burst ability. When they die, they explode and they make little versions of whatever plant they are. So having a druid that collects or creates Leshies out of endangered plants in order to try to preserve them, so that if he needs to, he can use the Leshy to seed a little, regrowth of this rare native species. There's lots of different ways you can incorporate them, and I think that either finding ones that fit naturally into the environment that they should be in, or finding ones that definitely shouldn't be in the environment that they're being in, that raises just as many questions and just as many plot hooks. If you're on the top of a mountain and you run into a Leshy that is clearly not suited for it, that to me is a great way to start an interaction and a conversation. So
To kind of shift from the narrative once back into going completely against our algorithm in Pathfinder Second Edition, one of the goals was having a D&D 5e uh, conversion of the material. I see a lot of players on Reddit, on Twitter, or kind of in our community that want more of a cohesion between the two systems. You know, um, what was it like trying to convert some of these stat blocks into a game like Fifth Edition, which runs kind of in a fundamentally different game theory at the end of the day? I mean, obviously, like you and I have to
yeah.
understand game theory to write this, kind of content, or at least professionally write this kind of content. Did you find a particular struggle in that? Was there any like challenges in, without bashing 5e as much as possible, please?
No, I mean I mentioned this. I think it was pre-stream, but I've honestly played more 5e than I've played of Pathfinder. I've just GM'd a lot more Pathfinder. Um, I am just not good at writing for 5e, at least creature wise. Um, I don't know that it's a flaw of the system so much as a really a strength of Pathfinder. Is it's just so easy to write something in Pathfinder that you know is going to be at least roughly balanced, and there's a lot more flexibility of what you can. Having flexibility to add in mechanics makes it easier to add in lore and flavor. If you know every creature in 5e has attack of opportunity. So giving a really fast creature in Pathfinder attack of opportunity is a big deal, whereas in 5e it's just naturally a thing that happens. Um, and there's not as much room in those stat blocks to add in other abilities. I don't know that certain abilities in Pathfinder translate all that well to 5e and vice versa. The all of the epic tiers are going to need to have legendary actions in order to keep themselves to be a level 19-20 creature, and that's just not a thing in Pathfinder because the 3 action economy kind of takes care of that. Likewise, creating difficult terrain when something dies in Pathfinder is annoying, but not the end of the world because you have so much mobility. In 5e, you don't, and that also creates issues with balancing out these creatures. And it makes it so that it's very different in Pathfinder. We know exactly when you go from 1 creature to 2 to 3 what impact that has on the encounter. In 5e, I feel like it's very different. And especially for something like if a creature dies and leaves an area that's now difficult terrain, that's a whole different thing you have to work around now than it would be in Pathfinder. Um, so yeah, I mean, the short answer to all of it is I'm bad at it. That's why we ended up hiring on somebody, Dagonzo, who's doing great, to help with those conversions, because just having somebody to check them over to make sure things are still balanced is a lifesaver. Uh, I don't think that it's a flaw of 5e as much as a strength of 2e, of Pathfinder 2e, that it's so much easier for me at least to do those designs.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's ever going to be a perfect conversion between them. I don't know that you'll ever have, a spreadsheet that you can say, all right, if it's a level 5 in Pathfinder, then it's a CR or whatever in 5e, and you just have to convert the AC and the DCs and the health to be these. I don't think that'll ever happen, because there's so much more to the balance than just the math sometimes. Really trying to see how all the different parts interact with each other is the challenge of making a good design. And I think that's hard to do from one system to the other.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know lots of Kickstarters have that, both Pathfinder and D&D 5e, and as someone who has to interact between the two systems a lot, you mentioned a lot of like difficult terrain, for instance, like in 5e you can only like bonus action dash if you're only a certain class, right? Um, was that ever something you took into account when writing a character? Because I think this is something that, like you said, Pathfinder does really, really well, and something I always commend the writers for is that I never have an issue converting between 5e to 2e or practically any game into second edition, just because of the versatility alone. Um, was that something that you had active in your mind, thinking a little bit more big picture, or you're at a certain point you're just like, hey, someone else's job, I'm done.
Well, I initially thought that it was going to be my job, and I was not up to it. No, so I really designed everything solely for Pathfinder to start with, and that kept everything consistent. That kept everything balanced well. It was the easiest way to double check my own math and to make sure that things actually were working the way I thought that they were working. Um, and then converting to I think that if I designed a given creature for both games in the same time, parallel streams of development, I think that would have created potentially a better product overall, but maybe a less impactful product for both options, if that makes sense. I think it would have overcomplicated the 5e product, and it would have washed out the Pathfinder 2e product a little bit. Um, because I would have constantly been trying to account for the other system that I didn't need to. I mean, realistically, there are things that you can do in 5e that you can't do in Pathfinder, just as much as the other way around. And so really having the creature fully mapped out and fleshed out for Pathfinder, making sure that everything looked good, and then doing that conversion, it was a little bit more challenging, and that's why I now have someone else doing it for me. But that, I think, leads to a better product overall for both systems, because now the 5e one is made for 5e and the Pathfinder one is made for Pathfinder rather than being made for both.
Yeah. Um, as we're starting to like wind down the conversation a little bit, what was something that you really wanted for people to take away from the Botanical Bestiary overall? I mean, obviously it's a bunch of stat blocks, but even Book of the Dead had its like main messaging going, not all undead are like evil, ghouls and liches. And I got fiddlebones now, and I'm
Mhm.
happy with undead.
I think one of the main things, at least for me, for this book, became that a plant creature doesn't need to be an ent. Not every single plant that you make in a game needs to be a tree that came to life with 2 legs and 2 arms. That's just a person, but they look like a tree. I think recognizing that there is so much diversity in your options when you're using plants in your game, for creatures. I mean, and I submitted so many plant creatures to various design contests, and I get a lot of feedback of like, "Well, it's a plant. Shouldn't this be a trap? Like, it doesn't move, right? How can it do whatever? It's a hazard." Um, and that, I think, is a limited view. I think that that's something to take out of this, is the sheer number of options. You know, there's 65, 66 plants in here that are each unique, very few overlapping characteristics, while still being essentially just a variant of one creature. And none of them, with the exception of Colorado Space, are magical or fantastical plants. They're all plants that exist in the real world. And that is just the reality of, you know, what diversity of, you know, biological life is like. And there's no reason not to lean into that. Making a fantastical creature is great, but there's a lot of, I mentioned it early on in the book of, you know, the magic in the mundane. Just because you see something every day, you get used to it. You know, if we had flying lizards that breathed fire everywhere, we wouldn't be impressed by dragons. We would just be like, oh yeah, it's that thing that flies around every Tuesday. And
Yeah,
likewise, we
that
see
burns
these
down the
plants.
village every time, just
Yeah,
it's
you know,
not.
Trogdor. It's rough. And I think that's true of plants. Is we see flowers every day, we see trees every day, and we get used to them. And then we look into like what these plants are actually doing and what they've evolved to do over time. And why they've evolved to do it is fascinating to me. And I think that's what I want people to try to take away from this is lean into what nature has to offer and see what kind of cool stuff you can get out of it.
Yeah, that's something that always, for me personally, like always had me interested in my environmental science class was because of that evolutionary aspect of, we don't think about it, but having a bunch of trees in one central location can create its own atmosphere. Like in the Amazon rainforest, that thing is running on its own atmosphere.
Yeah.
Um, I'm really glad that you overall made this supplement because one, I just now had my complete, love of plants now just immediately come back to my head in one interview. Um, so I think the big question is, are we gonna get a part two? But with the crazy creatures. I mean, I want nuts. I need everything crazy. I need a three-headed, fire-breathing Leshy that can, eat itself and become a giant Earth. Leshy.
So keep taking notes on the side here.
Oh, I know.
I would
God,
say
I'm
they're
giving you free material. I guess I got to take a portion of the next Kickstarter.
gonna end up on a design credit somewhere. There are future projects in the work. So at the sort of at the final goalpost here, I decided to finally actually make a company out of all of this, because accounting is and taxes are terrible.
Oh, they
And so
are.
my intention is to be producing more stuff under that company name. And so we'll be hopefully launching a Kickstarter. It's been delayed while we're finishing up this Kickstarter, but I'm hoping to launch in the fall. And then we'll also have some other products coming out that I am just starting to talk to some authors now about it. So people who aren't just me writing cool stuff.
That's pretty
Also
cool.
leading into that plant theme. So there'll be some crazy plants, some crazy Lushies. Not only Lushies is my goal, but we'll see how that works out.
Where can people find this uh fantastic product? I mean, I'm waiting. I can't wait to get my physical copy of it just so I can add it to the Pathfinder collection I got behind me.
Yeah.
Where can people find to go purchase something like this?
So right now it's still available for pre-order. It's leshy.backerkit.com. We're getting it set up on DriveThru RPG soon, and we'll also be having it hopefully hosted on our own website that's currently under construction. And you can also follow me on Twitter at TTRPG and there'll be lots of updates and previews and sneak peeks and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, if you guys don't follow Matt on Twitter, I'm telling you now, you're missing out on some really great tweets. All right. Uh, it was really funny because I think we ended up like not realizing that we weren't like either following each other correctly or something. Like we've
Yep.
interacted so many times that we just kind of assumed.
Yep.
But yeah, thank you so much for being here to talk to me about this. This was something I've always really, really passionate about. I'm really glad to see it when it came out, and just thank you for being such a great sport with setting all of this up and everything. It's
Thank you for
been
having
really
me on.
fun.
It's my first live interview for something, so it's been great.
Hey, you know what? I gotta. It's gotta be me. I don't.
Yeah.
I, any this insatiable ego has to get.
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, besides that, thank you everyone for watching this great interview. I am super looking forward to seeing what else is gonna be out of down the pipeline with all this. And if you like what you saw, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun YouTube algo stuff, because I gotta say it's just in the contract, when you sell your soul for some pierogi, it's just like there's gotta be stipulations, all that fun stuff. But yeah, you can check out all of our amazing interviews in the playlist on the channel, and I will see you guys hopefully soon. I came back from New York. I don't know if Eli's gonna get mad at me for saying this, but I just came back from uh filming a bunch of stuff, and for Deadly D8 we got like a bunch of scripts written out. I'm super looking forward to it. I'm not gonna say much because I'm not allowed to, but for the anyone who stayed around this far, that's just for you. Uh, and with
That's
that, I wish
awesome.
everybody a great evening, great day. Uh, Go hug a tree. I don't know why, just go do it now. And I will see everyone in the next live stream or video, depending on our release schedule. I'll see you all later.